There's been a big huff and puff about the situation, in particular with mail in voting. People on the left say that we need universal voting, people on the right say that we can't do that, or some combination of reform or the both, right? So let's just say this right off the bat. People will try to mislead you by saying that this is going to be the USPS, okay? They take pictures of mail trucks being towed every day. Now, why is that? Well, you look at this tow truck, and it does not look like it's state of the art. In fact, we are using these 40-year-old trucks, and they break down constantly, every month basically, and they need to get towed. Why do you think they have a towing truck specifically for that reason? And the USPS, okay? It's because they break down that often, okay? Now, why do they not have better truck? Probably because they don't fund it well. So, when you talk about, well, let's expand the voting to everybody who wants a voting in their house, let's talk about how we need to revamp our services first. Clearly, we're not providing adequate service if our trucks are breaking down all the time. And so this just basically means we're not making enough money. And when you look at the fake news CNN, they make articles blasting the president because he just does not like to spend money when they want him to. As an example, our economy went down 33% and they want another $20 billion for the USPS plus another trillion, another Democratic pork barrel spending. And the Democrats will make a huge massacre about this. They're planning on getting people to uh, to subpoena the postmaster general, to make them look all terrible. And when you look at this NPR poll, it suggests that over half of the Biden supporters want to vote by mail, which is why the leftists are so adamant in voting by mail, because most of them will vote by mail if they get their way. So how are we going to do all of this? How are we supposed to progress in this country at the same time while our economy is cratering? That's what I am asking. Okay? So, when they say that Donald Trump is changing history, he's rewriting history, let's look at the history. The USPS has been alive since the 70s, so it's been around about 50 years. It has about 500,000 employees, and it has Louis DeJoy, who's a private sector businessman appointed by Trump to become the Postmaster General. Now, people hate this guy, and why? Well, he was a supporter and a major donor of Donald Trump, but more importantly, he was in the private sector, and he basically wanted to go and make the post office great again. That means that he would have been a guy who would have endorsed he would have basically have reformed it to make it more of a logistical service company, sort of like a profitable version of what we have right now. And if you look over here, he was one of the founders of the XPO Logistics Company, so he would know exactly what to do, knowing everything to make things efficient. As in, he would even look at what pallet you're using, the plastic, the wood, whatever. So this guy's intensely concentrated on how to make our postal service great again. So he's a great guy. And so when we look at the administration so far, we have had the same trucks from the 70s, okay, which is ridiculous. And in America, we are supposed to deliver 660 million pieces of mail every year, as well as to 142 million different places, okay? We have 30,000 post offices around the country, and we deliver 150 billion pieces of mail annually. Now, this is insane. And we have a civilian fleet of vehicles, which, what does that mean? We have 230,000 vehicles, and they're all crappy, and they're all Grumman LLVs, usually. And if you know anything about the LLV, you can see that the production was from the 80s to the 90s. We're driving 35-year-old cars, ostensibly, to the point where we have people use their own cars that are better than these old trucks because they're just not appropriate and they break down. So if anybody has driven a car from the 80s, you know it's not a good experience usually. So these aren't Mustangs from the old times. These are just old crappy vehicles from the Reagan era, and they're not upgraded. And why aren't they upgraded? Because we don't have the money, because it's not profitable, because we spend too much money and don't charge people enough, or we're not efficient enough. Why are we not efficient enough? And it's because we have a bureaucracy. And honestly, The only way we could get to be able to afford mail-in balloting without going into debt would be to reform it, and we can't reform it if it's by the government in terms of how it's running. So when you look at FedEx and USPS, you can notice that they have better trucks, and that's because they can innovate basically. So when they started off in 1920 with this UPS truck, they could upgrade to the point where in 2013 they had these trucks which are better than what they had before. And if you look at these newer cars, again, they improve and they improve. Our USPS doesn't improve. Why does it not? And it's simply because we don't invest and we don't have a free market to incentivize competition. So right now, we have all sorts of reforms. Over here in Europe, they adapt to the situation. They have planes, Hong Kong, etc. They are great at reforming and adjusting to their society, adjusting to the customer base, and that's exactly what we need. And when we look at how much money they're making good money usually. And they have 500,000 employees, meaning that the UPS is on par with the USPS, the government service, but they run with more profit, with better cars, and provide a better service. Now, when you look at the United Post Office surplus and deficit, you can look and see that for most years it was in a deficit, and when it was in a surplus, that was when it was in a good economy anyway. And you can see that it's correlated with the overall economy, and outstandingly so. I believe that for the last 60 years of government mail, you can see that they've been losing money like 85% of the time. And ever since 2007, so ever since the recession, they've been posting negative numbers to the point where under Obama, we've lost like $12 billion alone from this government service. So they're clearly not doing well. They're not running it well because there's not enough reform. And while there's a lot of reform proposals, the Democrats do not let them do this. And the Postmaster Generals want to do work to improve it, especially the one we have now, but we just can't do it because the government does not let us under the Democrats. Now, Donald Trump wanted to make Amazon and other places grow their commitment to the government service and to pay us more to make our thing viable. But because the Democrats don't assist them in the Congress, they don't enable them basically. And while, yes, there is some competition between the USPS and the United Parcel Service and FedEx, and you can clearly see that with subsidies from the government, they can only haphazardly compete and they have certain monopolies over certain areas. Okay, so this is just a bad move, and this is just a ton of inefficiencies that we have within the government. And of course, I don't want to destroy the USPS, but at the same time, they're not adequately doing enough right now. So when we're looking at the service, this is clearly one that's beyond repair almost, and we definitely need to sort this out, and we do need to reform this from the ground up. Again, I'm just going by showing you pictures of things. So right now, clearly, we don't have enough money for the post office as it is. And clearly, this isn't a problem because of the president. This has been a problem the whole time. In fact, Obama was blaming the USPS like when he was campaigning in 2008, but he blamed it on Bush. Now people are blaming Trump for the problems that have existed since Bush, actually. And when we look at how many ballots would be cast, from 1996, there was only 8% of people that were voting by mail. In 2016, about 20%. And when we look at the 2020 election, 80% of people are going to be valid to vote, basically. So we're dealing with potentially 80 million ballots cast by mail in 2020, which is even double of 2016. So how are we going to double down on the post office when we don't have enough money? How are we going to keep this thing solvent? And we clearly cannot. And when we look at the congressional response, Nancy Pelosi, Botox Pelosi, just cannot make this work because she's asking for more than we can handle. Now, we are giving them billions on billions of dollars to survive as a company or as a service. And what do they return? In revenues, they're making millions and millions of dollars, but that's just not quite enough. And in fact, their net losses for 2017 was $2.7 billion in the red. And then when you look at 2018, They went $3.9 billion in the red. So what does that mean? It means that in terms of the government giving them billions of dollars to work with, they are losing us $4 billion over the last 2 years, basically. And now that we're $4 billion in debt with this specific service alone, we are expected to all of a sudden double their workload and give them like quadruple the money that we give them a year. And with what money exactly is what you're asking? We have all this shred around here, all this blood. We're bleeding money. And what do they want? What do the Democrats want? They want to spend more money. Where are we getting it? We're borrowing from China. Now, this is the thing. People, Democrats, don't want to vote in person because they don't want to get COVID. Well, let me tell you, when these people were protesting, did they care if they were going to get the virus? Apparently not. So tens of thousands of Democrats and leftists want to risk their lives going out and protesting, but they can't go out and vote. These dummies, honestly. And when you look at the virus cases, yes, they're going up, but the new cases are going way down, and the virus is going down. And in 2 months in November, do you really think it's going to be that bad? I don't really think so. And this is a huge problem that we need to stop right now. Now, when we look at what the left is doing in the Postmaster General's house, they're protesting outside of his house. These same people who don't want to vote in person are protesting in person at this guy's house in DC or whatever. So just a complete lack of class, complete hypocrisy from the leftists, of course. So basically what I'm saying is that, as an example, we have the botched NYC primary. Now, this was just a primary in June 23rd, which was about almost 2 months ago. And when you look at 400,000 mail-in ballots, which is only a small fraction of what we could get now, they're still bungling it. In fact, they don't know who's winning the election really between Carolyn Maloney and the leftist that she's primaried against, because they're still trying to read who sent what ballot, and they're completely struggling. And Donald Trump criticizes this over a month in, and they don't even know who wins. So it allows you to rig the elections for sure. And in fact, a lot of mail-in ballots, when you pick them up, whoever picks up the ballots as a bulk can see which ones are Republican and Democrat, and they can just throw away the ones that they don't like. Okay, so let's say you have a Republican getting ballots from a black neighborhood. He could just throw those away or only report half of them. And if you have a Democrat going to a white neighborhood, he could just say, well, most of these are Republican, I'll just throw these away. So again, who's going to pick these up? Would it be fair? Are people forging signatures? What is going on? Okay, clearly these imbeciles don't know how to read the mail-in ballots that they support so much. So what makes you think that it'll work all of a sudden? Even keep throwing money at it. People are still protesting. They don't really care about COVID. Nobody cares. It's just a pretense. Of course, everybody's going to support fixing this, but how are we going to fix it with all this debt? Well, Representative Tommy Massey covers this as well. So he did a poll with thousands of votes, about 10,000. You can look over here. How the U.S. Postal Service has been losing money for over a decade. What's your preference for the balancing the books at the USPS? Remember, we're $4 billion in debt this year, not counting COVID, in the USPS system alone. And most people want these are your four options: raise the prices for people who want mail, so that's kind of bad. A taxpayer bailout, which means we're going to give them money even though we're in debt to fix their debt, so whatever. So borrow money from China to bail them out. Well, reduce service, so make it even crappier, or pay less into pensions. So this is what we're doing. Because we didn't reform this postal service decades ago like we should have, we are basically conceding a lot of the market to just insolvency, and this is just a big problem. And in fact, I really don't think that any of these are an optimal solution, and this is exactly why we need to have a more free market approach to certain things. So, guys, this is our problem. This is our debt. How do we fix this situation with the UPS truck? Of course, mail-in voting. What's the take? What's the summary? In my opinion, I think that we should not do mail-in voting. We should not guarantee it at all. In fact, I think it helps the Democrats. We should just stop it. Also, If you look at 2020, if the election is close and there's a lot of mail-in ballots, millions of them, like the Democrats want to, they're not going to call the election until like December, January, who knows. The inauguration day could pass and they don't know who's the president. They could still be counting the hundreds of thousands of ballots from mail in Pennsylvania and Michigan, etc., Florida. So, guys, this is just a crapshoot waiting to happen. If this goes on and we do have the mail-in voting, expect either Biden or Trump to sue the results of the election. Expect recalls. Expect a complete crapshoot. Just a slaughter of our democracy. It's kind of sad to see, in fact. So if I were Donald Trump, I would keep throwing money at it because I know that Pelosi won't even let me do anything, and just blame it on the Democrats for their inaction and completely go against mail-in voting, sue the places that are doing it, do whatever you can to stop the mail-in voting because it's not helping. Absentee is fine, like you said, but mail-in voting is very, very, very bad. That's my take. Thanks for watching.